The first time the king saw her, she was kneeling in the dust, not begging, not crying, just sitting there as if the world owed her nothing, and she expected nothing in return. The marketplace of Eldoria was loud that morning, merchants shouting, coins clinking, guards pushing through crowds, and yet somehow, she was the only thing he noticed. King Alaric had seen beauty before. Nobles dressed in silk, daughters of lords trained to charm with every breath. But this girl, barefoot, dirt on her skin, torn fabric hanging loosely over her shoulders, and, still, she looked at the world like she feared nothing. That was what unsettled him. That was what pulled him in. "Bring her to me," he ordered quietly. The guards hesitated. "Sire, she's just a street girl." Alaric didn't blink. "I wasn't asking for her title." Minutes later, she stood before him. No bow, no greeting, no fear. The entire marketplace went silent. People dropped their goods. Conversations died mid-sentence, because everyone knew one thing: you bow to the king, or you suffer for it. But she didn't. She just looked at him, straight into his eyes, like he was just another man. "What is your name?" Alaric asked. A pause. Then she answered, calm as still water, "Lira." "No, your majesty, no respect, just Lira." The guards tightened their grip on their swords. One wrong move and she would be dead before her next breath. But Alaric smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but like a man who had just found something rare. "Lira," he repeated slowly, "you will come to the palace." It wasn't a request, it was a decision. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was the strange one. Then she said something no one had ever said to a king and lived. "I don't want to." The silence that followed was suffocating. A woman gasped. A child started crying. Even the winds, the king's smile faded, not into anger, not yet, but into something colder, something calculating. "You misunderstand," Alaric said, stepping closer. "I am not offering you a choice." Lira didn't step back, didn't flinch, didn't lower her eyes. Instead, she leaned in slightly and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Then you misunderstand me." That was the moment everything changed. Not just for her, for the kingdom, for the king himself. Because in all his years of power, Alaric had never met someone he couldn't control. Until now. That same evening, the royal decree was announced across Eldoria. The girl named Lira would become queen. No trial, no courtship, no consent, just a command. And when the royal guards arrived to take her from the streets, they didn't come with open hands, they came with chains. But what happened next was the moment the king realized he hadn't chosen her. He had challenged something far more dangerous than he understood. Before we continue, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's always amazing seeing how far these stories travel around the world. There's something you need to understand about Eldoria. It wasn't just a kingdom. It was a promise. 300 years before Alaric was born, the founders of Eldoria made a covenant with the land itself, that power would protect its people. That the throne would serve the weak, not consume them. 300 years later, that promise was dust. The streets were full of people like Lira. Forgotten. Hungry. Invisible to the palace walls that loomed over them every single morning. But Lira wasn't just forgotten. Lira was different. She had known it since she was 7 years old. The night her mother died in the cold, right there in the street, outside a bakery that threw its old bread away every evening rather than give it to the starving. Something inside Lira had cracked open, not broken, opened, like a door to something ancient. Something that had been waiting for exactly that kind of pain. The chains arrived at dusk. 4 guards, iron shackles, a royal seal stamped on the order. The marketplace had cleared. Word had spread. People watched from doorways, from rooftops, from cracks in shuttered windows. Everyone wanted to see what would happen to the girl who had told the king no. The first guard reached for her wrist and screamed. Not a shout, not a curse, a scream, raw, sharp, like something had burned straight through his bones from the inside. He stumbled back, clutching his hand, his skin blistering, red, like he had grabbed fire, not iron. The chains clattered to the ground. Lira looked down at them, not with surprise, with something closer to disappointment, like she had hoped it wouldn't come to this. The captain of the guard stepped forward, jaw tight. His name was Davon. 30 years in service. He had seen men executed, kingdoms conquered, and things in war that never left his sleep. But he had never seen what he was seeing now. He ordered another soldier to pick up the chains. The soldier hesitated, then obeyed. The chains lifted. The crowd held its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. The chains snapped shut around Lira's wrists. And the air changed. Not with a sound, not with a flash of light, with a feeling. Like standing at the edge of something you couldn't name, but your body already knew to be afraid of. Every horse in the marketplace panicked at once. Carts overturned, stalls collapsed, a child screamed somewhere in the distance. And Lira just stood there, looking at Devon. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. He forced a laugh. "Soldiers don't show fear. That's the first rule. You're coming with us one way or another." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, "Fine." And that quiet, calm, one-word surrender was somehow more terrifying than any threat she could have made. Because it didn't feel like giving up, it felt like allowing. They dragged her through the streets like a criminal. But no one jeered. No one threw stones. They just watched. Silent. Pale. Because something about this felt wrong in a way that lived beneath words. Like they weren't watching a girl being taken to the palace. They were watching a storm, being carried into the heart of the kingdom. Inside the palace, not everyone was surprised. One man in particular had gone pale the moment he heard the name, Lord Kalen, the king's most trusted advisor. A man who had sat at the right hand of 3 monarchs. A man who knew every secret the palace walls had ever swallowed. And Lord Seelan knew exactly who Lira was, not her name. What she was. He had spent 30 years making sure that what she carried stayed buried in the streets. Kept hungry. Kept weak. Kept too broken to ever become what it was always destined to become. He had almost succeeded. Almost. Now she was walking through the palace gates. And Lord Kalen went to find a knife. The throne room of Eldoria was everything the streets outside were not. Gold, marble, light, a cathedral of power designed to make every person who entered feel small. It had worked on every single person who had ever stood before that throne. Until Lira. When they brought her in, chains on her wrists, dust still in her hair, she walked into that throne room the same way she had stood in the marketplace. Like the room owed her something. Alaric leaned forward in his seat. He had expected fear, tears, the performance of survival that the desperate always gave when they finally understood the power of the man in front of them. Instead, she looked at the throne like she was studying it, like she was cataloging its flaws. "What are you?" he asked. The court went silent, not who, what. Because even a king's instincts knew the difference. Lira tilted her head. "I was hungry this morning," she said. Alaric's jaw tightened. "Answer me." She stepped forward. The chains pulled tight, then loosened on their own, like they had forgotten what they were supposed to do. "I was cold last night," she continued. "I slept on stone. I drank from the gutter." Another step. "And you're asking me what I am?" Her voice dropped, soft, precise. "I am the consequence of a kingdom that forgot its people." Nobody moved, because that wasn't just defiance, that was an indictment. And truth is always more dangerous than rebellion. In the shadows at the edge of the court, Lord Seelan's hand tightened around what he had brought with him. His eyes found the captain of the guard. A small, almost invisible nod. A signal. Alaric rose from his throne, slowly, deliberately, every inch the ruler. "You will marry me," he said. "And everything you were before today will be erased." The court leaned forward, because this was the moment. the surrender. The part where she finally understood what it meant to stand before a king with nothing in her hands. Lira looked at him and laughed. Not loud, not wild. Just a quiet, almost pitying sound, like she was watching a child threaten the ocean. I would rather die, she said. The room held its breath. Alaric's expression didn't break, it hardened. Very well. If you refuse to be my queen, then you will serve as an example. He turned to the guards. Take her to the lower chambers. Everyone in that room understood what that meant. The dungeons beneath Eldoria's palace weren't just prisons. They were where people went to be erased. As the guards moved toward her, Lord Talon slipped closer, just close enough. His hand rose beneath his robe. And then, Lira looked at him. Not at the guards, not at the king, at him. And Lord Talon froze. Because in that look, he understood that she had known about him from the moment she walked through those gates, that she had always known. She smiled at him, small, patient. Not now, that smile said. But soon, the guards dragged her away, and as she disappeared through the iron doors, she said one last thing. Just loud enough for the king to hear. You think I'm trapped in your kingdom? A breath. You don't even realize you just locked yourself in with me. The dungeons of Eldoria were not built for mercy. They were carved deep into the earth, far below light, far below sound, far below anything that could still be called human. Ancient, cold, absolute. The chains that fastened her to the wall were older than the palace itself, etched with symbols that no scholar in the current kingdom could read anymore. Symbols that had been put there not to hold people, but to hold things. Things that woke up when kingdoms broke their covenants, things that fed on accumulated suffering. Things like what lived inside Lira. Above in his chambers, King Alaric stood by his window. He should have felt victorious, control restored, defiance crushed. Instead, he felt watched. The first scream came at midnight. It rose through the palace floors, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Alaric turned. What was that? No one answered, because everyone had heard it. Down in the dungeon, the guard posted outside Lira's cell was no longer standing. He was on his knees, hands pressed over his ears, blood dripping slowly between his fingers. Make it stop, he was whispering. Please, make it stop. But there was nothing to see. No attacker, no wound, no visible source, just a sound, low and vibrating like the earth itself had begun to breathe. Inside the cell, Lira was sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, chains still locked to the wall. And she was listening, not to the sound, to something beneath it, something that had been waiting in the dark beneath this palace for longer than Eldoria itself had existed. Something that recognized her. The second guard ran, no orders, no protocol. He just ran, up the stairs, shouting, not looking back. By the time the captain arrived with reinforcements, the first guard was gone. No blood, no body, no trail, just his helmet, lying in the center of the corridor, split clean in two. The cell door was opened, torch raised, light spilled into the room. Every man at that doorway stopped breathing. The chains were still on the wall, still locked. But they weren't around her wrists anymore. They hung loose, limp, as if they had never held anything at all. And Lira stood in the center of the cell, unbound, unhurt, smiling. That's not possible, one guard whispered. She never left the room. No one opened the door. The captain stepped forward. How did you? Lyra's head snapped toward him, too fast, not human. You shouldn't have come back, she said. The torch flickered violently, and every single man in that doorway saw something behind her. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. Something vast, something old beyond memory, something that had no name in any language still spoken. One man dropped his sword, another started praying, a third simply screamed. Then the torch went out. What happened next? No one who was there could ever fully explain. Only fragments survived, sounds of metal tearing, footsteps that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. That low vibration, now louder, now closer, now hungry. When the torches were relit and reinforcements arrived, The cell was empty, the corridor was empty, the guards were gone. Only one thing remained, scratched into the stone wall, not with ink, not with tools, forced into the rock itself, like whatever made it had pressed its will directly into the earth. 2 words, for the king. I warned you. Upstairs, King Alaric felt the floor beneath his feet tremble, just once, just enough. And for the first time in his life, he understood what fear felt like. The tremor didn't stop. At first, just a faint ripple beneath the marble floors. Easy to ignore, easy to explain. Then the chandeliers swayed, then the glass cracked, then the screaming started. Servants ran through the halls clutching walls that seemed to breathe beneath their hands. Nobles stumbled from their chambers in silk robes and wide eyes, shouting over each other, "What's happening? Is it an earthquake? No, this isn't natural." In the throne room, King Alaric stood perfectly still. Too still. Because deep down, he already knew. This wasn't the earth shaking. This was a response. Outside the palace gates, the entire capital of Eldoria was changing. Fires erupted in places where no flame had been lit. Shadows stretched wrong along walls, twisting into shapes that didn't belong to anything alive. Animals howled and broke free. Even the sky looked wrong, too dark, too still. The stars arranged in patterns that no astronomer in the kingdom could later explain. And at the center of it all, she walked. Lira, barefoot, unchained, moving through the ruined streets of a city that had ignored her entire life. Moving through it now like she owned every cobblestone. No guard dared approach her. The ones who tried dropped to their knees before they got close. Not out of loyalty, not out of choice. Out of something so deep and instinctive that their bodies made the decision before their minds could argue. A woman leaned from a doorway, face wet with tears. "Please, make it stop. What is this?" Lira didn't slow down, didn't look at her. "This," she said quietly, "is what happens when suffering is buried instead of healed." 300 years of buried suffering, walking through the streets with bare feet, and no one, not the guards, not the nobles, not the king himself, could stop what was already in motion. Back in the palace, a messenger burst into the throne room. Breathless, pale as bone. "Sire, the dungeons, empty, the guards gone, the city is—" "I know." Silence slammed into the room. Because the king had just shouted. And kings like Alaric didn't shout. From across the room, Lord Calin watched him, and for the first time in 30 years of service, the old advisor looked afraid. Not of the girl. Of what would happen when the king finally understood what she was, what she had always been. What Lord Calin had spent 3 decades trying to prevent from waking up, and what was now, undeniably, awake. The throne room doors opened, on their own, no hand, no mechanism, no explanation. They simply parted. Cold air swept through the room, carrying with it the sound of whispers, hundreds of them, layered, ancient, unintelligible, and full of something that felt like old grief turned sharp as a blade. And through those doors, Lira stepped inside. Same torn clothes, same bare feet, same calm face, but something about her presence now was heavier, like standing too close to lightning that hadn't struck yet. Every guard in the room backed away. Even the captain, even Davin, who had crossed battlefields and never once flinched. None of that had prepared him for this. "You wanted me," she said. Alaric stepped down from his throne, slow, careful, measured, but for the first time, not dominant. "What are you doing to my kingdom?" Lira glanced around the throne room, at the cracked floors, the trembling walls, the terrified faces, then back at him. "I'm not doing anything," she said. A pause, a breath. "I'm just not holding it back anymore." Alaric's jaw clenched. "Stop this, and I will spare you." Lira smiled, that same quiet, unsettling smile. "You still think you have something to offer me?" The ceiling split above them, stone fell. The whispers sharpened. "People begged you to stop their suffering," she said. "They cried, they starved, they died." She stepped closer. "And you did nothing." Another step, but now you're begging. Another step, and suddenly, it matters. The king's hands were shaking. Not the hands of a king anymore, the hands of a man. Tell me what you want, he said. And that was when Lord Seelan moved. Later, no one could agree on exactly what they saw. But every account said the same thing. Lord Kalen stepped forward with something in his hand. Something etched with the same ancient symbols as the chains in the dungeon. A binding instrument. 3 centuries old. Built specifically for this. Specifically for her. Proof that the palace had always known. That the suffering of Eldoria's streets had never been an accident. That it had been maintained. Deliberate. Calculated. Because a kingdom built on pain produces a very specific kind of power. And Lord Kalen had been harvesting it for 30 years. He raised the instrument. Lira didn't even turn around. Don't, she said softly. He didn't stop. He believed his 3 centuries of preparation were enough. He was wrong. The binding instrument flew from his hand, hit the wall, shattered. And Lord Seelan, the man who had managed kings for 3 decades, crumpled to the floor. Not dead. Just unable to move. Like something had sat on him that had no physical form. Pinned. By truth. By history. By everything he had spent his life trying to suppress. Alaric stared at him, then looked at Lira. How long? He asked. His voice barely above a whisper. How long has he known? Lira finally turned to face the king fully. Longer than you've been alive, she said. The suffering in your streets was never neglect, Alaric. It was architecture. That word hit the room like a physical blow. Architecture. Designed, built, maintained. The pain of Eldoria's forgotten people, she continued, was the foundation that kept certain people powerful. And I was born into it, raised in it, sharpened by it, until I became something that could not be controlled anymore. Alaric said nothing. Because there was nothing left to defend. He had ruled a kingdom. He had never once asked what it was built on. Above them, the darkness in the ceiling pulsed. Closer now, lower, the vast ancient thing that had been growing in the foundations of Eldoria for 300 years, pressing against the boundary between worlds. The voices of the forgotten, crying, raging, grieving, all at once. The entire court had fled. Only Alaric and Lira remained. And Lord Kalen, still pinned to the floor. Watching. Unable to stop what he had spent his whole life preventing. You don't control it, Alaric said. Slowly. The realization landing like stones one at a time. You never did you? Lira's hands trembled. For the first time. Just slightly. Just enough to matter. I was never trying to control it, she said softly. I was trying to survive it. That changed everything. Because suddenly she wasn't the source. She was the vessel. The carrier of something older than the kingdom itself. Something that had been growing and waiting and feeding on suffering for so long that when it finally had a body strong enough to carry it, it wasn't going to stop. Not for chains, not for dungeons, not for kings. The throne room shook, the ceiling crack widened, and the thing above began to emerge. Not fully, not yet, but its shadow alone swallowed the entire room. Alaric didn't run. He stood there, broken, shaking, but standing, and he looked at Lira, not as a ruler trying to assert control, but as a man who was finally completely seeing. Tell me how to stop it, he said. Lira met his eyes. And for the first time since this began, there was no defiance there, no cold distance, no wall, just truth. You don't stop it. The shadow descended lower, and if it fully comes through, she held his gaze. There won't be a kingdom left to save. This is the moment I need you to understand something. Not about Lira. About Alaric. Because what he did next was not the act of a king. It was the act of a man who had just realized that everything he believed about himself was wrong, and chose to face it anyway. He took off his crown. The metal hit the cracked marble floor with a sharp final sound that echoed through the ruined throne room. Lord Seelan, still pinned to the floor, made a sound like a wounded animal. Because he understood exactly what that meant. I built this, Alaric said. He stepped toward Lira, toward the weight, toward the thing descending from above. I let it become this. Another step. So I don't get to stand over there and watch you carry it alone. Lyra's eyes widened, just slightly, just enough. You don't know what you're saying. I do. He reached for her hand. The moment skin touched skin, everything exploded. Not outward, inward. The whispers didn't just surround them anymore. They entered him. Every voice, every memory, every piece of accumulated pain that Lira had been carrying since the night her mother died in the cold outside a bakery that threw bread away rather than share it. 300 years of suffering given to a king who had never once felt hungry. Alaric screamed, not in fear, not in shock, in understanding. His knees hit the floor, but he didn't let go of her hand. He didn't let go. You feel it now, Lira said softly. He nodded, tears streaming freely down his face, the face of a king who had just lost the right to pretend. Yes. Another wave hit him, and he didn't resist it, didn't fight it, didn't build walls against it the way men in power spend their whole lives learning to do. He accepted it. He opened up and let it in, and something changed. The shadow above paused. The descent slowed, because for the first time in 300 years, the weight wasn't being ignored, wasn't being buried, wasn't being maintained by men like Lord Kaelan for their own gain. It was being carried, shared, acknowledged. The thing above, vast, ancient, hungry, twisted, uncertain now, like something that had expected resistance and instead found something it didn't know how to consume. Responsibility. Lyra exhaled, slow, long. The breath of someone who has been holding something impossibly heavy for years. Not free, but for the first time, not alone. This won't end tonight, she said. I know, he replied, his voice barely recognizable, hollow and full at the same time. We rebuild. A pause. We fix it. He looked up at the darkness still swirling above them. Or it comes back, and it finishes what it started. Lira studied him, the way she had studied everything since she was 7 years old on the street, watching people, reading them, finding the truth beneath the performance. She saw something in his face she hadn't expected to find there. Not power, not authority. Grief. Real unguarded grief for something he couldn't undo. And she made a decision. Not to forgive, that would take years, not a trust, but to allow, to let this be the beginning of something, rather than the end of everything. Then you'd better start tomorrow, she said. Above them, the shadow receded, slowly, reluctantly, not gone, not defeated, waiting. Lord Talon, finally able to move again, scrambled to his feet and ran. He was found the next morning at the edge of the kingdom's border, sitting in the dirt, unable to speak, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. He never recovered. They said it was madness. But those who looked into his eyes said it looked less like madness and more like memory. Like he was being made to feel everything he had buried for 30 years. All at once, all the time, forever. As the first light of dawn touched the broken palace of Eldoria, one truth settled over everything that was still standing. A kingdom doesn't fall in a single night. It rots, slowly, quietly. One ignored cry at a time, one hungry child at a time, one piece of bread thrown away when it could have been given. It rots until something forces it to face itself. Lira didn't have supernatural power because she was special. She had it because she survived things that should have destroyed her. Because she carried pain that a broken system deliberately created, and instead of breaking, she became the consequence of it. The power she held wasn't hers. It belonged to every person who ever died cold on a street they built with their own hands, every voice that was silenced, every story that was never told. Lira was just the one still standing, still breathing, still refusing, still refusing, still refusing. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing in any kingdom is the person everyone decided didn't matter. Before you go, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it? Drop your country and time in the comments. I genuinely want to know who stayed until the very end of this one. You are the reason stories like this get told. If this story moved something in you, and I believe it did, Hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe and tap that notification bell, because I have stories coming that are even darker, even deeper, and even more powerful than this one. And you do not want to miss what comes next. I'll see you in the next one.